in this meeting from different time zones.
Start over. He's now live streaming.
Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, good night to everyone. We welcome everyone from our different time zones from all over the world. I am Shakira Mohammed of Trinidad and Tobago, a teacher for the past 15 years, and this is the 169th edition of our Zoom public meeting. And we wish to sincerely thank all of you who have contributed in whatever way to the success of this ongoing Pan-Indo-Caribbean and Pan-Indian Diaspora Global Project. So for 168 unbroken continuous weeks, we have been here every single Sunday. And in the past 3 years, 6 months, and 1 week, we have featured 721 presenters from all parts of the world, speaking on 168 topics. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a weekly forum being hosted by the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center, a legally registered research and publishing company operating since 2010. And in order to continue this weekly program and to make it bigger and better, we are asking for your suggestions and volunteers as well as donations, and you can contact Dr. Kumar Mahabir for details. So last week was historic for Guyana. In 1838, John Gladstone introduced Indian indentured laborers to Guyana to replace his emancipated enslaved Africans. Last week, the Gladstone family visited Guyana to offer an apology for slavery and indentureship and pledged to donate £100,000 as a form of reparation. We hope that a fair sum of this money would go to the study of indentureship and benefit Indian lecturers and students at the university, as well as fund projects in Indian communities. So ladies and gentlemen, I wish to bring on our moderator this evening or tonight, who is again Shalama Mohammed, the co-director of the Zoom platform, who is a business teacher and researcher from Trinidad and Tobago. She obtained her master's degree in business psychology from Franklin University in the USA. Shalama, welcome.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Namaste. And a very warm welcome to you all. I want to thank you so much for choosing to be here with us. This public meeting will take the usual form of a panel presentation, followed by questions and answers after each presentation. The entire program should last no more than 2 hours. We are recording live, and this recording would be uploaded later on YouTube permanently for posterity. We are also live streaming on the YouTube channel of the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center, and I want to greet everyone on YouTube at this time. To avoid intrusions from trolls, our IT manager has muted everyone. So speakers, please do not admit anyone, do not unmute anyone, and please don't allow anyone to share your screen. Thank you so much for cooperating. Our topic today is entitled The Impact of the Partition of India in 1947. And this topic was selected in observance of India's independence celebration on August 15th, 2023. So the 1947 partition of India was a momentous event in South Asian history. It left an indelible impact on the region's social, political, and cultural landscape. As British colonial rule came to an end, the partition led to the creation of 2 independent nations, India and Pakistan, and later Bangladesh. The partition triggered one of the largest migrations in human history, which saw the displacement of millions of Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs as they were forced to leave their ancestral homes and cross newly drawn borders. The partition's legacy continues to shape the geopolitics of South Asia, influencing regional conflicts, religious tensions, and the complex relationships between India and Pakistan, and with them Bangladesh. The partition has cast a long shadow, and today we will be discussing its legacy on collective memory, intercommunal relations, and political dynamics. So let's move on to our first speaker. And this is none other than Dr. Dilip Nath. Dr. Nath is a think tank executive leader in the higher education and healthcare vertical. He is the president of ISPAD, that is, Indian Subcontinent Partition Documentation Project. By passion, Dr. Nath is a voting right and political advocate. Welcome, Dr. Nath. You can go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you, Salima, for this kind introduction, and also want to thank Dr. Mohabir and India Caribbean Cultural Center for hosting today's event. Again, my name is Dilip Nath, and happy Sunday from New York. Many of the faces here look familiar, and certainly I also want to give a shout out to Ashok Ramsaran, who is happened to be my neighbor here in the Freshwater, Queens. So Ashok, namaste as well. Let me bring up my presentation. Let me know if can you see my presentation?
Yes, it's quite clear.
So as Salima has alluded, this year India is celebrating its 76-year independence, and today we are discussing a topic that is very far and wide, and many of us are directly or indirectly impacted by the partition that took place in 1947. And certainly my family, that I can attest to that, we have been uprooted, displaced at least 4 times in 1947 and 1965 riots, and then later on in 1971 Bangladesh war, and then 1992 Babri Mosque program, religious program. So this is an unresting, the event that is continuously to happening even 76 years later. So what I intend to do, at least, bring some highlight from my perspective, the impact and the partition that took place in the region. As Salima also mentioned, I'm currently a president of an organization which was founded by Dr. Sasi Dasidar many years ago. It's called ISPAD, Indian Subcontinent Partition Document Project. Primarily what we have been doing is really live interviewing those who survived and really hearing their story, how they survived, what they have seen, what the impact, and how they are doing today. So if you have a moment, please visit our site, ishpad1947.org. So let's see if I can move through these. So as you all know, the partition, India was divided, or division between India and Pakistan was British India, basically creating a 2 separate country, Pakistan and India, in 1947. It was somewhat a mechanism by which British secure agreement over 2 countries. That's what ended up happening. And certainly the partition left both sides, India and Pakistan, devastated. And it triggered, let me just move this out of the way, excuse me for a second so that I can see my screen. Trigger riots and mass casualty, and of course the colossal wave of migration. Some of the historical background, as we all know, the British Raj really dominated the region for 200 years, from 1858 to 1947. But even before that, right, British has been ruling India since 1600s, through East India Company, and through the British Empire ruled that region for years, and expanded through their domination through the colonization, expanded of the colonization. Now, if you are to look for the partition, obviously there are many host of reason, but there are few are primarily important. One of them is, I think, the religious and political division between Hindus and Muslims for years. And the British in India were a significant factor leading up to the partition. The polarization of Hindu-Muslim occurred during during the whole century. But in 20th century, for decades, both group get into a situation where it no longer is adherent to leave both groups simultaneously or peacefully. So of course the British policy, divide and rule, was significant factor in that division, and it was, the colonial project, if you recall, divide at empire, which is formulated religious, antagonism and facilitated the continued imperial rule and reached its tragic culmination of 1947. And impact on the population and the violence, right? Obviously, millions of people and found themselves on the wrong side of the border. 10 million people became refugee. Nearly 15 million people were uprooted, displaced, making these largest population displaced in the humankind history, right? And of course, the migration that followed the partition was vast majority, of the contemporary by surprise. The scale that movement was unprecedented by any measure. And not only that, it just didn't displace the people. It also triggered a widespread violence, riot, mass casualty, and hundreds of thousands of people losing their lives. During that time, nearly 2 million people either got killed or somewhat disappeared completely, and was never documented. Many of these people later on, as we interviewing through our Ishpat project, we are finding story after story, and many of this was untold for years. Now, in terms of socio-economic and consequence, obviously the partition of India led to the formation of the two different countries, India and Pakistan, which resulted in disruption of trade, agriculture, infrastructure, causing the downfall of the economy in both countries. The partition also has a long-lasting effect on social fabric, particularly in the communal relation and ongoing tension between the two countries, with politicians and military stoking and hatred in 1947 and their own ends. And the partition led to division of political power and establishment of the separate government, India and Pakistan, resulting in ongoing tension, conflict between the two nations, with millions of people becoming refugees and losing their homes. And it just didn't end there. 1947 was not the end. It's continued until 1971. During the migration, obviously, Bengal, majority of the Muslim and Sikh, they sort of migrated into one side of the country, and rest of the other people, they migrated to India. Majority of the Muslim and the Sikh obviously migrated to the Pakistan side, and Bengalis were East Pakistan later, which became Bangladesh. Now, if you see that in terms of the political unrest, or the partition led to political turmoil in Kolkata. Back then was the capital of the country, and with active backing by the Congress, and obviously 1906 Muslim League was formed, and partition was back for 1971. But what is unknown is the high-level negotiation between the political elites do not shed much light on why the partition unfolded the way it did, involving the fight and death of millions. In 1971, again, Pakistan, although is a Muslim majority, became a Muslim majority country, yet to Bengalis and Pakistan, they could not stay in the same side of the history, and that caused 1971, where Bengalis got the independence, to the bloodshed of losing 3 million people, and 2 million women was raped or gang raped. And it was one of the I think in a short 9 months, with the largest bloodshed that ever happened in the history, and it was quite um, unprecedentedly, we have not called it a genocide, but it was quite a genocide that took place in 1971 when Bangladesh got independence. And obviously, India had helped them to guard the liberation um, and got independence from Pakistan. But what we see today, even in 2023, the same, many of the problems still remain, despite the country separated in many ways, divided in many ways based on the religious. And if you look at particularly in three of the country, India has a similar issue of still communal riot, persecution, minorities are being victimized. And similarly in Bangladesh, there's a continuous persecution of religious persecution against religious minority, particularly Hindus, Buddhists, and Christian. And people are still migrating. Like I said earlier, in 1992, my family became a refugee for the last time in India due to the Babri Mosque religious persecution in Bangladesh. And if you look at the population in Bangladesh today, since 1998 and now, in 1998, I believe the religious minority was close to 19%. Today, that is dwindling down to nearly a 9%. What is that really simply saying? People are continuously migrating to India. And as Professor Baraka, one of the professor at Dhaka University, has projected, if this trend continue, by 2035, Bangladesh will have zero religious minority. So what is really telling us or teaching us from this history, the division that British has created, that what is ingrained in our culture, in our belief, that we're still fighting on the simply of the belief of the religion, and it's still the same bloodshed is still happening. And subsequently, if you look at in Pakistan, when Pakistan was divided from India, there was still used to be about 5% religious minority. Today, that is winded down to less than 1%. And if you look at the economy, India has becoming one of the largest economy in the world, but it's still, there are many parts of the country these religious tensions still exist. And Bangladesh also, economically, they are doing extremely well, but the religious persecution, fight still remain there, and there is no different in Pakistan. So 76 years later, I'm not exactly sure what we have learned. We still have not learned how to live together with harmony, and we still have the same teaching in several generations later what British taught us. The British not only destroyed our culture, they have ingrained in us that we can no longer coexist two religions together. That's what seems to be happening in that region. So with that, I wanted to conclude my presentation here. If you have any question, I'd be happy to take those questions. Thank you.
So Dilip, thank you. That was quite insightful and very brief. I expected you to go on a little bit further. So I'm seeing something here from Ashok. Ashok, would you like to unmute? Please unmute and you can go ahead and ask your question now or make your comment. Ladies and gentlemen.
Actually, I don't have a question, but I want to thank Dilip, who's a good friend, for a comprehensive summary of what happened and the consequences that affect people in both countries, that affect their lives today and continuing on, because it's a country that was divided by the occupiers at the time of their departure without any thought of the dire and deadly consequences. And when you talk about Holocaust, over 20 million people on both sides lost their lives in that transition. And we don't talk about it much in the Western world, but it's a Holocaust of a terrifying magnitude. Uh, it will continue to be a problem unless and until there is recognition and acceptance and some kind of acknowledgement, just like reparations by the British government for what they have done to people at the time of their departure. So thank you, Dilip.
No, no, thank you. I mean, you said it rightly. 76 years later, we still have much of the same problem exists in that region. And despite being many of our generation that live abroad today, and we here in Queens, if you are in New York, if you will, people from 200 different countries that living coexisting together and celebrating each one of us holiday with harmony. But again, for whatever reason, same we could not do it back home, and it is a continuous problem. And part of it is there are other country, other influence are still there that teaching the wrong thing for our newer generation, particularly hatred towards other religion, whether it's a Hindu, whether it's a Muslim, it doesn't matter, because we are not taking the humanities on the on the forefront. What we are putting a lot of priority and importance on the which religious is better than other, and what is seems like in many times if you look at in that region, and whether it is the imam, whether it's a pundit, oftentimes their preacher is really towards hatred, and that's the biggest challenge and the problem that we have. We could in India or Bangladesh or Pakistan, they could be economically doing so well, they can produce all the doctor and engineer, but if we don't have this basic fundamental that we can respect each other, we can respect each other religious, I think this problem is going to prolong for generation.
If I may add something to that, you have a mixture there of history of ownership of property that is being taken away, and you mix that with politics and religion, and you have an explosive situation each and every day because it's used for political purposes, it's used for religious purposes, and until the two of them can come together and say, religious side and the political side, and say this is enough, perhaps the people should demand those things, but the people are overwhelmed by those two factors. So thank you for being so lucid and so straightforward in your comments. Thank you.
Of course. Look, in 1992, when there was the Babri Mosque massacre took place, my family in Bangladesh, we never even heard about Babri Mosque, right? But yet, on Friday after the Jummah prayer, hundreds of Muslims just went up, burning the village after village, and which was what for, right? And that displays the hundreds of thousands of people. So what we have not teaching any of our religious leader, pundit, imam, one wrong does not make the other wrong correct, right? Because somebody destroy the Babri Mosque, that doesn't mean you are going to burn down the village after village in Bangladesh, which has those people have nothing to do with the Babri Mosque. So as my family, and and also particularly the woman on that night, there's a 3,000 women being raped or gang raped, and somewhere died. And in fact, I can I'm going to recall this, something. One of the young girl who was died on that night, who I went to school together up until 5th grade. Then obviously I moved here, and she was, died due to the rape, and her family had nothing to do with any of these Babri mosques, right? So again, what our religious leader oftentimes encouraging this behavior, and which is really a detrimental to the progress and continuous success of that region. And what is happening now, this rise of militant group, whether, doesn't matter what religion is that, teaching them extremism is impacting the sustainable democracy that we have been preaching for in that region as well.
Okay, Dilip, thank you very much for that. Mr. Manek Bujwala is waiting to ask a question. Mr. Bujwala, go ahead and ask, please. You'll have to unmute your mic.
Yes, a question I have was, you mentioned that there's been a reduction in the number of minorities to a very small level, point something from in Pakistan. What was the change in the minority population in India after the partition?
So if you look at the in India, their number is religious minority, I think, had grew in India as opposed to in Bangladesh and Pakistan. Religious minority has shrink drastically, particularly in the case of Bangladesh. It went from, since 1998 to now 19% to nearly 8.5%.
I see. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Robbie, Pandit Robbie also had a question. Robbie, go ahead, please. You'll have to unmute.
Right. Namaste, Sitaram. Assalamu alaikum. My question was based on a few readings, few documentaries I've seen. When Pakistan was formed, was there any groups who was against the formation of the Pakistan? Especially what we know today, I saw something with this area called Baluchistan, where the Baluch movement doesn't recognize the formation of Pakistan. Any comments on that?
So if I recall, Balochistan was, they did not actually recognize into Pakistan much later. They didn't believe in the separation based on the religious belief. But again, the fight for the decades in the middle of the, in 20th century was either was created by British. I mean, I don't know exactly, but I think there was some sort of divide and rule policy they had applied, and that sort of created the two nation, right? Was it necessary? I don't know what transpired during that time. The elite, the politician, had never really shed the light on that. Did it really had to come down to separating the two countries? I don't know. There was many movement took place, but nothing so comprehensive that these two countries can coexist. And if you look at the fight, it was. I mean, if you think of it in 2023, was it really a meaningful fight? Because of the religion? I mean, come on, right? I mean, we could not coexist. I mean, the millions of people, the family got affected by that. Was it really justified? I don't think so.
Okay, thank you, Robbie. Thank you, Dilip. Let me just ask this question on behalf of Sheila Maraj. She's saying in the chat that partition happened because Muslims did not want to live in a Hindu majority country. It was they who insisted on partition and not the Indians. I think Indians were both Hindus and Muslims, but Dilip, can you please respond to that? Who wanted the partition?
I mean, if you ask me, I don't think ordinary people wanted the partition. If you through our interview, through his path, we asked many people, hundreds of interviews that we have done. I mean, I think it was mostly, politicians, so on the both side of the group, and I think British was implanted this for years, and oftentimes they created this fight among these two groups. So it was cultivated, and I don't
I
think
see.
it was ordinary people ever wanted to do this.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. So, ladies and gentlemen, Dilip, I want to thank you very much for your presentation as well as your responses. And I just want to bring on our second speaker, and perhaps we will have an opportunity after if anyone would like to comment further and ask further questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, our second speaker is Dr. Adityanji. He is a medical director working in the mental health care industry. He's the president and chairperson of the Council for Strategic Affairs, a think tank with an international outlook, which is based in the USA. Welcome, Dr. Adit. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much indeed. Let me share my PowerPoint and then I will start. I hope all of you can see my PowerPoint.
Yes, it's clear.
Okay. So that's the logo of the Council for Strategic Affairs. Few of the activities that we do are educational. We foster dialogue, discussion on geopolitical issues. We promote strategic studies. We do 2 programs in a month, a roundtable discussion and a distinguished lecture. We have a summer internship program, and we also have a fellowship training program in strategic studies. My thanks to Indo-Caribbean Culture Center for inviting me once again on the topic of impact of partition of India in 1947. So when you bring this topic, the question is impact on whom? Impact on India, impact on Pakistan, impact on people of Bangladesh, impact on the whole region, and impact on the geopolitics and international relations. So we have to look from all those perspectives, and I will try to summarize my point of view. I must say that the moderator and the previous speaker have already given all the details and facts. So I'll try actually not to belabor the same points, even if that may be in one of the slides. I will probably underemphasize that and move on to the points that have not been discussed. So I like to put some maps here. So this is the map of undivided British India. And it has this region of Balochistan, Pakistan, the current India, the Sikkim here, the region of Bangladesh. But most people don't realize it also had actually the current state of Myanmar. Till 1937, the current state of Myanmar was part of British India. And that again shows the same thing with names of provinces. The British Raj in India, 1930, it also has the entire province of Jammu and Kashmir. When we talk about partition of India in 1947, there was no agreement a priori about relocation. But despite lack of agreement, about 15 million people moved or were forced to move, and almost 2 million people died in the violence. Many were killed by the other community and sometimes by their own families, especially women and children were killed by their own families to sustain the honor. There were infectious disease because of mass movement, starvation, malnutrition. Women were often targeted as symbol of the community honor, and more than 100,000 were raped or abducted. And when you talk about the impact of partition, impact of partition on current India is that it is truncated India. It is vivisected India. That is the most visible impact of the partition on India. And of course, you have seen horrified pictures. A lot has been said about British policy of divide and rule in the Indian subcontinent. So there is this thinker, Alex von Tuzzelman, who observes in her history Indian summer, when the British started to define the communities based on religious identity and attach political representation to them, many Indians stopped accepting the diversity of their own thoughts and began to ask themselves in which box they belonged. A British scholar by name Yasmin Khan, in her acclaimed history, The Great Partition, judges that partition stands testimony to the follies of the empire, which ruptures community evolution, distorts historical trajectories, and forces violent state formation from societies that would have otherwise taken different but unknowable paths. We don't know what it would have been. The acclaimed Pakistani historian Aisha Jalal has called partition the central historical event in 20th century South Asia. She writes, a defining moment that is neither beginning nor end, partition continues to influence how the peoples and states of post-colonial South Asia or, United British India envisage their past, present, and future. Let's look at the divided and rule policy of British imperial system. They divided Ireland in 1920. 8 counties are still part of the British Empire, part of United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Have the problems solved in Ireland? No, the problems are still there. There is still communal strife between Catholics and Protestants in Northern Ireland. So this, wound is festering in Ireland, also brought by British colonialism. And of course, Ireland is a European country. So you cannot isolate it to South Asia or Indian subcontinent or say that it is peculiar to Indian subcontinent. Look at Palestine. Again, Palestine was a British mandate from League of Nations. In 1948, Palestine was supposed to have been divided into a Jewish state and an Arab state. Did we solve the problem? No, problems are still there because the same policy of divide and rule was adopted. And of course, United British India was partitioned, and we are still seeing the problems. Look at other places where, Britain was colonial power. Sri Lanka, they use the same divide and rule policy between Sinhalese and Tamils. And Sri Lanka is still facing civil war till 5 years ago. Myanmar, although there are no two definite communities, but the effect of separation of Myanmar from United India is leading to lack of democracy, frequent military rules, and kind of civil war in which the country's military is killing its own civilians. So British Empire used the policy of divide and rule not just in Indian subcontinent, it was everywhere the British Empire went. And this led to strife and strengthening of British colonial rule at the expense of the subjects of the colonial empire. In each case study, the effect of British divide and rule policy is still having lingering geopolitical effects, including in Indian subcontinent. Countries that were partitioned still have to deal with the unfinished business of partition. Countries that were not partitioned are showing the effect of war, civil war. This actually shows you the GDP of countries in South Asia. This is 2021 data. And I'm putting this just to belabor a point. And this also shows you the per capita GDP. If you look at 2021 data, if United India was not partitioned in 1947, Indian economy was 3.176 trillion US dollars in 2021. Bangladeshi economy was 406.3 billion US dollars, and Pakistani economy was 348.3 billion US dollar in 2021 in nominal terms. If India were not divided, a united in India in 2021 would have a $4 trillion economy, which by 2023 would have already passed 5 trillion mark. Think of the implications. What perceived consequences of partition have done to the people and to the successor states. If India were not partitioned in 1947, we would not have a war in 1948. The war between India and Pakistan over Kashmir. There might not have been war between India and Pakistan in 1965. There would not have been war of liberation of Bangladesh in 1971, and a genocide of Bengali people would have been avoided. There would not have been a war in 1999 between India and Pakistan in Kargil. Imagine if these 4 wars were avoided, how much capital overlay the spending of war would have been saved and would have gone for the betterment of socio-economic conditions of the population. That's the perceived geopolitical impact that we have to calculate if India were not divided. If India were not partitioned in 1947, there probably would not have been a war in Afghanistan. The impact on the geopolitical region near abroad. There was no reason then to form Al-Qaeda in Pakistan or Afghanistan if India were not divided. There would not have been terrorism in Indian subcontinent. The state of Pakistan has supported Khalistani terrorism in India. The state of Pakistan has supported cross-border terrorism in India, and of course, Bangladesh genocide. All these problems, historical problems that had happened, probably would not have happened because geopolitical conditions were changed and countries were divided, which continued to fight amongst themselves. If India were not partitioned in 1947, a strong and united India would have already been a superpower. A united India could have been by now the 3rd largest economy already. A strong and united India would have already been a net security provider in the Indo-Pacific region. A strong and united India would have already been a developed country. A united and strong India would probably have been a member of United Nations Security Council by now, by sheer impact of the economy and the strength of the state. And lastly, a strong and united India would have already had a permanent space station, just like Russia and China have. A strong and united India possibly would have landed a man on the moon, just like United States. And I'm just extrapolating from India's space program. So think of the implication. Issue is not how many people were displaced, how many people were killed and brutalized. That is definitely important. But perceived impact on international relations and geopolitics, because the colonial powers did not want a strong India independent. So what they did, they created divisions, fostered those divisions, And they supported one state, namely Pakistan, by incorporating into military alliances as part of SEATO and CENTO, and provided weaponry, advanced weaponry to state of Pakistan, so that India and Pakistan were continuously at war with each other, giving the colonial powers or the leaders of the Western Alliance a foothold in the region, continued foothold in the region. And if the country was not divided, yes, you may have had some skirmishes, some communal issues, but it would not have been to the extent that we are facing right now. And with that, I'm going to stop my presentation, and I'll be happy to take some questions.
Excellent, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, please feel free to use the reactions button at the base of your screen. In there, you will see a raised hand icon. Please raise your hand so that I can call upon you and you can pose your question. There was a question earlier or a comment made by Dr. Roseanne Kanhai, and I will ask her to please unmute her mic and go ahead and ask her question. Dr. Roseanne, go ahead, please.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted.
Yes, go ahead.
Right. So my question was, are any of the participants, or is the discussion in any way going to lead towards what this partition meant and means to those of us in the diaspora? So let me give an example. So when in
Roseanne, I think you're breaking up. I think there's an issue with your connectivity. We're not hearing you right now. Can you please try to rejoin?
But sorry, she was asking, what's the impact of the partition in the Indian diaspora? For instance, those of us who live in the Caribbean.
If you talk about Indian diaspora is kind of worldwide, not just in Indo-Caribbean region. You have Indian diaspora in South Africa. We had Indian diaspora in some of the other African countries, including Uganda, Kenya, in Fiji Island, in Malaysia, in Myanmar. I think if partition had not been there, these diaspora people would have been in a stronger position. You know what happened in Uganda? It didn't matter whether you were Hindu or Muslim or Sikh for that matter. Idi Amin regime suppressed, oppressed, and terrorized all the Indian diaspora there. You had, a coup in Fiji Island when an Indian diaspora person became Prime Minister, Mahendra Chaudhary. So partition weakened the civil rights of Indian diaspora wherever they were. If there was no partition and there was a strong, united India, taking care of all its citizens, just like it does now. If there is like trouble in Yemen, Indian government does the largest evacuation process and nobody asks questions. There was a war in Ukraine, Indian government did its evacuation process. So at this point in time, despite the limitations of partition, India is willing to take care of her own. That situation have been much stronger when Indian diaspora faced persecution in some of the African countries or in Fiji or elsewhere. So situation would have been much different, and at least the civil rights violations of Indian diaspora in certain countries would not have taken place. I cannot relate to the situation. I cannot empathize to the situation of Indo-Caribbean. So I would hope that maybe Dr. Mahabir or the moderator can answer that part because of their lived experience. I don't have lived experience in that part of the world. But, I have had organized some programs by Dr. Ravi Dev, from Guyana, and the problems that are being faced. Again, it's the same situation. If you had the mother country strong and united, the diaspora people in all those areas may not have faced the problems they are facing.
All right, thank you, Dr. Adit. Roseanne is also Indo-Caribbean. So despite the fact that she's in the US, I think she understands fully what we are dealing with here. I'll ask Dr. Surendra Pandey to go ahead with his question. Mr. Bujwala, I'll ask you to come next, if you don't mind. Go ahead.
I think the most important thing that we forget is that their mindset has been changed. The British have changed our mindset, and that's why we are still fighting, trying to partition. Khalistan wants its own state. Pakistan is obsessed with getting Kashmir. Now Baluchistan wants to separate from Pakistan. So the whole mindset has been changed that, yeah, we can partition, we can rule our own. And politicians are exploiting the common people. So when are we going to learn and change our mindset that can we live united? Why do we have to have separate state? It is all due to power-hungry politicians. They want to be president of their own country or ruler of their own country. So there is division going on. How to change that mindset? That's the main thing we have to emphasize.
I think it's not just the mindset of the population, but there are strong geopolitical factors operating. I may not totally agree with your observations. You mentioned about Balochistan is fighting for their separate existence. Actually, Balochistan had not opted, that there were two Baloch states that were under British India, but they had not opted to join Pakistan. They were forced, and they were forced to, under duress, to join Pakistan. So there is an issue there. Similarly, I gave the example of other countries where British colonial power was there. So it's not just specific to Indian subcontinent. And it is also not okay to just blame it on politicians because they become, easy punching bags. Yes, the mind states have to be changed, but there are larger forces that are operating. In post-colonial world, physical colonization has been replaced by intellectual colonization and colonization by other means like weaponization of human rights concept, weaponization of free trade. And colonial powers are still exercising undue influences using those mechanisms. Why do you think, Britain continued to support Pakistan in adventures against India, and United States actually armed Pakistan to the teeth? So there are geopolitical forces operating, and just to blame the politicians is not right. Yes, can the mindset change to the extent that partition can be undone? That's $1 million question. I can tell you, in 2 countries, partition was undone. And those 2 countries are Germany. There was East Germany under Soviet occupation, and West Germany that was part of the Western world. And yes, they were allowed to reunite. And despite minor economic problems, the integration of East Germans into West German free economy was successful. Similarly, you have example of integration of North Vietnam, which was communist controlled, and South Vietnam, which was supposedly, with the Western alliance. After the successful defeat of American forces in Vietnam, North and South Vietnam, reunited, and despite some hiccups, they were able to again integrate fairly well. Whether that will ever happen in Indian subcontinent, we don't know.
See, there is one difference. Difference is religious difference. In Germany, there was no religious difference.
You are right, but in Ireland,
But in India, Pakistan, there is religious difference.
in Ireland, there is religious difference.
Yes,
Catholic
that's how they
and
started. Yes.
And British people, in fact, it is said by historians that despite having separate religions and despite having colonial history, the citizens of British colonial India were not actually at each other's throat because of religion. These, differences were fostered by the colonial powers. And yes, they were done to the extent that, there's too much of animosity between the two states. But if you look at the example of India, yes, there may be minor issues, but the proportion of minorities, as Dr. Dilip Nath stated, the proportion of minorities in the demography of India is increasing. The Muslim population in India is increasing. Similarly, the Christian population in India is increasing. Sikh population in India is increasing as compared to Hindu population. The only minority that are actually declining in India are the Jews, because they have immigrated to Israel, and Parsis that have a very low birth rate. So the example is there of a united India. You have a president who was a missile man, President Kalam. So the example is that you can manage in a democracy the differences, religious differences. Unfortunately, because the nature of two theocratic states, Bangladesh and Pakistan, both are kind of Islamic republics. They have still influence in India on Indian minority population. So the differences are being exacerbated for geopolitical reasons. If these theocratic states are to disappear, there would not be anyone left to exacerbate those differences.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Adit. I see Mr. Dilip Nath with his hand up, so I'm going to ask him to contribute, and then Mr. Bujwala. Go ahead, please.
So I think one of the things that I wanted to kind of add it, whatever has happened, we cannot undo, obviously. Those, partition already happened, it took place. But I think in this century, our generation has a responsibility and obligation to make it better, especially the Indian diaspora in abroad. I think the problem to overcome within is very difficult, but I think from the diaspora point of view, we can create an influence where this region can be stabilized. What it really requires is civic transformation, and that transformation needs to happen from the abroad, from the Indian diaspora. And we, regardless of our religious belief, if we want to be powerful and lead these, various nations, and we are doing it in many ways, being in England, first brown, man to be, be the prime minister, and many other areas. We need to identify this brownness. That identity need to really stand up across the world. And I think then only we will be respected, we can gain the respect, and we can change the dynamic in that region. Otherwise, it will be a very lost case.
Dr. Dilip Nath, by and large, I agree with your point of view that partition, we cannot, bring the genie back into the bottle. That is true. But having said that, history never ceases. There's no end of history. The way the state of Pakistan was created, it was an artificially contrived state that did not last even for 30 years. And it got actually separated into Bangladesh and Pakistan. What is Pakistan today may not be Pakistan tomorrow, considering the fault lines of minority nationalities, whether it is Baluch, whether it's Sindhi. And if you look at Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province of Pakistan, that province used to be called Northwest Frontier Province. And under Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, that province did not want to join the Union of Dominion of Pakistan. So history never ceases. What you see as the state of Pakistan is a transitional state. What would be the successor states? And I'm not advocating any kind of military adventurism, but I'm just saying, hold your breath. It is not static. History never ceases. Yes, diaspora can change the attitude wherever they are living, but I'm very sorry to say, diaspora sometimes thinks that they can affect, they can influence and impact Government of India's policy formulations. That's not going to happen. Government of India is very strong, despite the party affiliations. India has its own purpose. Diaspora is minuscule. So let's not say that, just because the sun rises, we are the roosters, we are making the sun rise. So diaspora needs to understand its limitations, that you are not going to be able to influence the policies of Government of India. In fact, it's the other way around.
Very true, Dr. Adit. Thank you so much. Let's bring one last question now from Mr. Bujwala, and then we will bring on our third speaker. Go ahead, please. Mr. Bujwala, you need to unmute.
Okay. So I had a question about, what I read a long time ago, that before the partition was actually implemented, Mahatma Gandhi tried to save the country from being partitioned by asking Nehru and, the other Congress leaders that if we let Muhammad Ali Jinnah become the first prime minister of India, the new independent India, then he kind of asked them, why can't we do that to save the partitioning? But apparently Nehru's answer was that, and some of the other leaders probably, was that the Hindu majority will not like that or will not accept that. Do you have some opinion about that? Do you think really the community would not have, or was it just the politicians that did not listen to Mahatma Gandhi?
I think there is a lot of revisionism in history going on. First, to credit Mahatma Gandhi with independence. The independence and partition were a result of complex geopolitical processes. You had Second World War, in which the reigning hegemon, British colonial empire, that was kind of became a declining power. Instead of, fighting with the rising hegemon, which was United States, British Empire decided to become a junior part of the rising hegemon United States. There was some pressure from United States on the British colonial powers to decolonize all the colonies. But more than that, there was tremendous pressure on the British government because they were not able to hold the civilian population in check. It was not just the, Congress agitation and Quit India movement. There was a naval uprising in 1946, which spread to other forces also. It started in Mumbai, but it went to other ports where naval establishments were there, and including army cantonments. Second World War did see creation, establishment by UDI, Unilateral Declaration of Independence by Netaji Subhash Bose. and formation of a provisional government of independent India, Azad Hind government, in Andaman and Nicobar. In fact, the British Prime Minister Attlee, after he demitted office, visited Kolkata or Calcutta, and he was asked, he was staying there as a guest of the governor of state of West Bengal, and he was asked a question, and it is on record. What role Quit India movement and Mahatma Gandhi played in British decision to leave the subcontinent? And the answer was minimal. British were not able to rule India because Indian army officers and privates or the non-commissioned officers started to disobey the orders. They would not actually salute the white British officers. So there was a tremendous pressure on the colonial government. And of course, whether Mahatma Gandhi wanted or not British wanted division of India because they thought that despite leaving the political power, they could influence the geopolitics of the subcontinent and the world by having a foothold in the state of Pakistan. That was the agenda of partition. We can blame the politician who fostered those divisions, who propped up Muhammad Ali Jinnah. I think you have to look those things in perspective. It is very easy to write a revisionist history that Nehru wanted to have power or whatever and all that sort of thing. Ultimately, this is the way things happen. And I must say that British colonial power had more role to play in partition, which was actually enacted in a period of just 3 months without any rhyme or reason.
Thank you.
All right, so at this point in time, I want to say thank you very much to Dr. Adit and Dr. Dilip for your contributions. Excellent thus far. You're not leaving us as yet. What I would like to do is I want to bring on our third speaker. And ladies and gentlemen, we have an unusual situation with technology in this instance. Our third speaker is Ambassador Carlo Ungaro, who is 86 years old. He was born in India in 1937, 10 years before the partition. He's a retired Italian ambassador and diplomatic officer who served in a variety of postings in Africa, Asia, and Europe. He's a former political advisor to the Italian contingent of the International Security Assistance Force in Afghanistan. At the moment, he's in Rome, and his wife, Mrs. Marianne Douglas Ungaro, is in the US. And we are going to try to connect them with you via her technology. So please bear with us if you are not hearing properly, and I'm hoping that this will work smoothly. So please go ahead, Marianne, kindly unmute your mic.
Thank you, Shalima.
You're welcome.
Okay, and I've got Carlo. It's a good thing I have my iPad and the iPhone. So Carlo's on speakerphone. Ambassador Ungaro, is there anything that you wanted to start out saying, first of all?
Am I audible being on speakerphone?
Yes, we are hearing him. Thank you so much, sir.
Okay. It's a tremendous privilege for me to be able to talk to you on this occasion, because I have been very much attached to Indian history because of the fact that I was born there and spent the first 10 years of my life close to India. We were in Afghanistan, but I went to school in Lahore, and which was then. So I have a really deep attachment to what used to be called the subcontinent. As things are now, is it useful to ask the question whether partition was a good, bad thing. I think not, because historic facts are facts, and they cannot be undone after they happen. The fact that Jinnah was very, very popular in the north and brought with him a great slice of population from the Hindu India to the Muslim India, it was a fact of life, and it turned out to be a rather interesting rather than negative or positive. Of course, we had wars between India and Pakistan, which could have been avoided if partition had not taken place. But if partition had not taken place, there might have been all kinds of troubles and riots and all that, which already were taking place. I remember in Amritsar and in other places, there had been a tremendous amount of bloodshed because of the division between Muslim and non-Muslim populations. So the partition was, I think, one of those inevitable facts of life. But not everybody agrees with me, but that's my opinion.
Okay.
Do you remember?
Yeah, go ahead, please, Mariam.
Circumstances when you all had to evacuate, when you left on the refugee ship?
In 1947, we were stationed, my parents were stationed in Bombay.
Mumbai, yeah.
Waiting for evacuation because we were considered like refugees. And so we got on a British troop ship, which was very Spartan, and we left India in, I think, May of 1947.
How long did you travel?
It was, I think it was about a 3-week journey, I would say. I can't remember exactly, of course. But we traveled and reached Liverpool. That was our first European experience, was Liverpool.
Okay, I don't want to.
Yeah. So, but we always remained very much in touch with Indian affairs, to the point that I remember that in 1948, when the news of the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi came, we were very much touched by the news, and it was given big relevance in the Italian press, which is surprising because the Italian press then was not as international minded as it is today.
Okay, Shalima, back to you.
Okay, thank you so much. My question to the ambassador, what was his family doing in India? I don't think we were able to explain that to the audience. Why
Did
was
you
he
hear Carlo? She asked,
the question.
yes, she asked, why was your family in India?
My parents had been sent to India much before the outbreak of World War II, because my father represented a business concern, Italian, who was doing a lot of business with India, then Pakistan, the Punjab area, with the import-export of minor items. Then the war caught us in a neutral country, Afghanistan, and we were there for almost 10 years. The first 10 years of my life, as it were. And then finally, 1947, we left Afghanistan for good, which was not for good because I went back afterwards. But we left Afghanistan for good and took a train, the Bombay Express, from Peshawar to Bombay, and the rest was history. But we were very much part of. We felt that we were part of the Indian story. The whole family felt so.
And of course, you were at school with Indian children, boys.
I went to school in Lahore.
Right, at St. Anthony's.
Yeah, which still exists. It still exists.
I apologize. I had a question about that, which was your classmates, were they mostly Hindu or were there also Muslim students there?
Well, it's very difficult to say because not only had partition not yet taken place, but India was not yet an independent country. It was still British India.
Yeah.
And so there was a very large number of my schoolmates were Anglo-Indian, as it were. You know? But and since the school was in what then in Punjab, in what then became Pakistan, the majority of my schoolmates were rather Muslim than Hindu.
Okay, thanks. Shalima?
Yes, so what I'm getting from the ambassador is that the relationship between the Hindus and the Muslims before partition was very good. Is that correct?
Did you understand? She asked that she thought that her impression from what you said was that before partition, the relationship between Hindus and Muslims was very good. What is your thought on that? Is that what you?
I think it's almost impossible to answer that question because obviously they were not very good. Because as soon as the troubles began, the amount of bloodshed was immense. I mean, places like Amritsar and others in the Punjab were the theater of tremendous episodes of violence. However, when you have a government that's imposed from outside, such as a colonial government, it's very difficult to analyze accurately the reality of the relationship between different communities. And I was a child, and I felt that there were tensions, but not to the extent that then revealed themselves to be, you know, such as this immense bloodbaths that happened in some parts of the Punjab, especially.
Shalima?
Yes, thank you so much for that. Is there anything that he would like to comment on with respect to his feelings about having left India? Can he
Feelings
comment?
about?
Yeah.
Can you repeat that for me? There was a delay.
Can he comment on his feelings at this point in time, having left India? What was the general sentiment in his family about having to leave India, and what does he feel now?
Did you hear that? What was your feeling then and also now about your family having to leave India in 1947?
This is not a difficult question to answer because the answer is very definite. I and my family and I always kept on thinking of ourselves as being part of the Indian story, even though a very minor part. And I still today I have for India as a subcontinent, meaning the whole, not only the India as a nation, but I have a feeling of tremendous attachment to all things Indian, and the Indian people. I even like the Indian accent when English is spoken. I love it. Because one does not forget that kind of an immersion very easily, and one doesn't want to forget it because it's a very positive impression.
Especially since it was your early childhood.
Yeah.
He loves curries, and his mother cooked curries also.
So that was my next question.
We are curry people. We love curries. Ayurveda. I'm very interested in Ayurveda. Carlo also happened to know, because his family eventually went to Los Angeles, to Beverly Hills. His father was named as, he joined the diplomatic service after being in the business community. Then he was at the Farnesina, the Italian foreign ministry. But they went to Los Angeles, lived in Beverly Hills. Carlo went to junior high school with Dustin Hoffman and with Ingrid Bergman's older daughter. But he also knew this lady who went by the Indian name Indra Devi. She was actually European, but Carlo's family doctor, that was his wife. And of course, like, she had renamed herself. And there's a very good biography of her. Carlo's read it. I haven't read the whole thing yet, but I remember him talking about her. And his mother, I don't think Carlo's mother ever went to any of Ms. Devi's yoga classes, but they definitely knew each other.
Yes, absolutely.
So I understand that she was quite a favorite of the British Raj.
Indra Devi was?
Indra Devi, yeah.
Did you hear that? Shalima was saying that Ms. Devi was supposed to have been a favorite of the Raj.
I'm not so sure. I really don't know. It's very difficult to remember those days, and also the books that have been written have always been rather one-sided. But she was an exceptional person. I remember that, and so was her husband, who was a German doctor. He also was an exceptional person. And in those days, Beverly Hills was one of those places where one met exceptional people.
Yes, so thank you very much for that. To members of our audience, if you do have any questions or comments that you'd like to make to Ambassador Ngaro, you have this opportunity now. Please, as you did before, use the reactions button and raise your hand. Meanwhile, I'm going to read a comment here in the chat from Lubna Nadvi. Or Lubna, would you like to speak directly?
Excuse me?
No, she was asking the audience to participate and for their questions and comments. Okay. Just stand by.
I'll just ask you to read there. Lubna, please, if you would like to unmute, go ahead, please.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay, I'll just try and read the comments that I've actually typed in the chat, and that's basically my contribution, if that's okay. So basically, I said thank you to the last two speakers, the first two speakers, for highlighting the fact that ordinary citizens of pre-1947...
Hold on, Carlo.
Yeah.
The fact that ordinary citizens of pre-1947 India did not want partition, and the idea of communal friction and hatred was introduced by the British into the region precisely to divide and rule. And in British India, Indians from all backgrounds lived harmoniously with each other for generations. And I know this because my parents were born and raised in India, and they spoke to me about the sort of harmonious coexistence. So my parents grew up in pre-partition India and lived in post-partition India for a short while until they left India for a brief period for further studies. And when they tried to return to India, this was in the late 1960s, early 1970s, they were told to go to Pakistan by some elements as they were Muslim. So they eventually ended up in Karachi and later migrated to South Africa. And they always reminded me about how much they loved their land of birth and how tragic the partition was. So I think that we need to, as a global Indian diasporic community, have conversations about healing relationships between India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, as well as talking about how to end the military occupation of Kashmir. And someone mentioned early on about how difficult it is to actually interfere in state affairs, and I appreciate that. So I think that these conversations can actually happen at people-to-people level, at citizen level, so we can try and heal these sort of painful relationships at that level, even if the governments are so intent on constantly fighting each other. I mean, I think we need people-to-people dialogue to come together and heal whatever pain they exists. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lubna. Would the ambassador like to comment on what Lubna just said? Marian?
I have a bit of a lag, so I missed the last part of what or the first part of what you were saying, Shalima. I heard Lubna's comment. I did hear that.
Right. Would he like to comment on that?
Did you hear what Lubna was saying, Carlo? About
I heard it, perhaps not all together. I mean, but I got the gist of it, and I think that the person is totally correct to say that there was really almost, I'm saying, one can't say there was no inkling, but there was almost no inkling of these forthcoming tremendous tensions and violence between the two communities in India in the years preceding 1947, because we first heard about these events while we were already on our way out from India in 1947, exactly. And there have been these terrible incidents in Karachi, in Amritsar, and in other places. But I had been just until only briefly before, as a child, I was sent to Lahore to school because it was considered a very secure place. Lahore, Peshawar were considered very secure places. And when my schoolmates in Lahore, some were Hindu and some were Muslim and some were Christian, but there never was a visible or appreciable tension among these religious groups in the schools, in the school classes. The Muslims would learn Urdu and the Hindus would learn Hindi. But it's basically, one could say, it's in many ways it's the same language, written differently and pronounced perhaps differently. But there was not an inkling of the tremendous violence which was forthcoming, and was the responsibility of the colonial administration. Maybe there was. How can we tell? Our impression. I was a child, but the impression that my parents had was, yes, there was. but it was an impression. There is no way of proving the point.
Right, we appreciate that. Thank you. I'm going to ask Marilyn Sophocles first to ask a question, and then we'll call on Dr. Shardanand. Marilyn, please go ahead. You'll have to unmute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Yes, first of all, thank you to Marian for inviting me to attend this very important conversation. It's extremely important to hear the testimony of Marian's husband, Ambassador Ungaro, because it gives both an external and internal appreciation of the situation, of the history at the time. And I would like to know whether Ambassador Ungaro plans to write about it, or if he has written to write about it further, because in hindsight, it gives a totally different perspective.
It is true, and a third-party, unbiased view is always appreciated. So, Marianne, would the ambassador be able to respond to that?
Did you hear? That's my friend, Dr. Sophocles, Marilyn, who is a U.S. citizen. She's originally from Martinique, Caribbean, which some people still claim is France. But did you hear Marilyn, Carlo?
Which to me is very tempting, because I often feel that I could perhaps put something on paper about that period, which has now become ancient history almost. And soon nobody will remember any of these.
Okay, I'm sorry, we
Go
didn't
ahead.
get the last comment.
Go ahead. So maybe the idea of taking.
We seem to be having some audio difficulties there with Marianne.
Okay, yeah, we got disconnected for a split second. Carlos said it's very tempting, and that he will consider about writing about it. I think you all heard him when he said that soon people will not remember this, but I think that certainly would not be true for the people of the region. And although there will eventually be no one there who was a witness who was alive at the time, but it's going to stay part of human history because of how, the devastation, what a big change it was for a major part of the world. I actually, Shalima, I wanted to ask Carlo to recount, because he's talked several times to me. He talks about his classmates, the ones who were more, as you use this term Anglo-Indian, the ones who were, to use my Western word, mixed, and the cultural outlook that some of them had versus the ones who were not mixed. And then there was the skin color issue that you have mentioned somewhat before in India. Can you?
This is a very delicate issue to broach, especially publicly like this. But one can put it down as personal reminiscences. My schoolmates were Anglo-Indian or Indian. They were called Indian in those days, no matter what part of the country they came from. And they were either Muslim or Hindu, and there was no trace of rivalry or even let alone hatred between these two. It started exactly in those years. Whether then there was a political inspiration on the part of the colonial power or not, that is something that needs to be analyzed carefully and objectively. But certainly it took me as a child by surprise, when only a few years later I realized that the whole subcontinent was in ferment and in turmoil. Yeah. I hadn't thought of it. When I say we, I mean my parents, and we had never thought of it as a possibility.
The conflict, you mean, the armed conflict?
Otherwise, they wouldn't have sent me to the Punjab alone to school. I mean, you know, and also my sister was sent alone to school in the Punjab, you know, because there was no hint of the troubles to come.
And Shalima, I have one more on top of that. Was this because I understand the current division geographically, so Punjab, was that because of the demographics? Was that where most of the violence was centered? Is it possible that people who lived away, communities that were religiously mixed, but away from the Punjab, were they equally affected by the violence that eventually led to the partition? Or was Punjab, you know, I know it could have been the epicenter, but were there possibly communities elsewhere in India, which is a huge country, a huge region? Were there other areas where there wasn't that level of conflict? Carlo?
Yeah. Well, no, I think that the Punjab, and particularly Amritsar, became a hub of these episodes of violence, because it was a place of passage. The people from the south would migrate north through Punjab, and the people from the north would migrate south through Punjab. And that's why it became a sort of a symbol of the conflict. But I don't think that the conflict started there, or that it was due to any specific Punjabi situation. But as I say, I'm talking through memory, and I might be totally wrong. Please correct me if anybody feels like correcting me.
Thank you, Shalima.
Yeah, thank you so much for that that comment. And I've asked Dr. Adit if he can respond to that.
Okay. I think there are a lot of misconceptions. You know, everything was not hunky-dory prior to partition. Yes, colonial powers were somewhat responsible because they were using Machiavellian tactics. Having said that, you know, there was a kind of election in which Muslim population was asked to vote for partition. And actually, in what is the remaining portion of India, majority of the Muslims under Muslim League's exhortations voted for partition. There was definitely a two-nation theory, which was enunciated by Muslim League, which was supported by Iqbal, and which was capitalized on by Jinnah for his, you know, lust for power. So there was definitely a two-nation theory. But I will also say that the differences were not so acute, but over a period of time, because the colonial power favored one section of the society, basically Muslim League and Jinnah, they created a monster that ultimately resulted in partition. And although the Muslim population in the current India voted heavily for partition, after partition, they chose to stay. And it is not true that the violence was only in Punjab. In fact, Muslim League had called for direct action in 1946 in Calcutta and Noakhali, where there was a genocide of Hindu Bengalis. So let's not have a romanticized version of history. There was definitely a two-nation theory that was exacerbated by the British colonial power for their own geopolitical considerations. So the history is full of warts. You know, there's no sanitized version of history. There was a lot of violence. There was train fulls of, dead bodies sent from Pakistan to India. There were women who were raped, who were enslaved. There were children who were brutally slaughtered. So history of partition is not that innocent. And yes, there was two-nation theory. It's not that ordinary people wanted to live happily, because the genie was taken out of the bottle. The genie of communalism, it was spread by the British. In fact, they tried to do the same. Just like they supported Muslim League, they also supported the Akali factions, the Sikh separatist movement from 1920 onwards, and tried to encourage Sikhs to separate from Hindus. So one has to take everything with a pinch of salt and not be very swayed by emotions. You have to look at the hard facts on the ground.
Thank you very much for that. We have just about 2 minutes left, and I want to ask Dr. Shardanan to ask his final question, and we will wrap up soon after. Go ahead, please.
Hello, everyone. I think, but this is just an opinion, the main problem is living in the collective mind of the Hindus and the Muslims, a traumatic mind. And we are not able to talk openly about this collective mind, because person to person, I have a lot of people. My best school friend is Lal Muhammad. There is a person named Rahman. Rahman was teaching Ramayana in Suriname. So the problem is not from person to person. The problem lives in our collective mind, and we are not able to talk about this, to eliminate the roots of this traumatic mind. That's what I want to make a remark to that.
Yes, and I want to thank you so much for doing that. It's one of the reasons why we decided to bring this topic on the program, because we wanted to allow people to give air to their feelings about this. Incidentally, I think this week ends what is known as South Asian Heritage Month in Britain, and I noticed quite a number of comments being made on some LinkedIn conversations, which expressed how the entire episode would have affected their families and so on. Unfortunately, not everyone is open to speaking openly about it. So for those of you who have spoken today, I want to thank you very, very much. I want to thank especially our speakers, Dr. Dilip Nath, Dr. Adityanji, Ambassador Ungaro, assisted by Mrs. Marian Douglas Ungaro, and all of you who made comments and who supported the program to this point. Thank you so much for being here with us today. At this point in time, I'll ask Shakira to close the program for me.
Okay, thank you, Shalama, and thank you to all those who attended and participated. As we said earlier, this public meeting is being hosted by the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center, and you can feel free to contact the ICC to publish your books and your reports. And remember, we are kindly asking for you to give us your suggestions, volunteerism, and as well as donations, and you can contact Dr. Mahabir for details. And we want to thank the advisory and planning team led by Dr. Kumar Mahabir. And we will be recording the program and will upload it to our website and to YouTube permanently for posterity. Our topic next Sunday will be the continuation of our series on conversations with elders on post-indentureship long-time days. So please visit our YouTube channel to see all our past recordings. I am Shakira Mohammed from Trinidad and Tobago saying goodbye. May God bless you all. Dhanyavad.
Thank you
very much indeed.
Okay, good night, everyone.
Good night, and thank you all so
Thank
much.
you. Grazie.
Yes,
Arrivederci.
thank you very much. Thank you very much.